Okay, now we're ready to bring our animated object into Stingray and get the animation working with some interactivity. So we're going to go ahead and go into our content folder, and I've already created a folder called animation. And again, using our file naming conventions in our directory structure, I'm going to create a new folder called door. And within there, I'm going to import our asset, and door anim is our FBX file. And now, you've seen this before, of course, but now is the time to check this checkbox that says animation and skeleton. So we want to bring all of those in, and notice right here it says import clips. So we'll say import to that, and this will bring in our animation. So notice all of the extra files that have come in. This is why the directory structure is so important. There's a couple of things we can check out in here. And so here's my door with that box, and I'm going to explain how we're going to use that in a second. But first, I want to preview my animation in this asset preview window. I need to hide that box, though, so that we can see it. Let's double-click on the door unit, and we're brought into the unit editor. Now, you may remember the unit editor from doing some of our UV textures for light baking. There's a lot of things that are going to happen in here, and we're going to use flow in here in just a few minutes to set up our door animation. You can see all of the sub-objects within this FBX file. We have the door frame, the sliding door, and there's our box, the physics trigger. Let's go ahead and select the physics trigger and just make it invisible for now. We're not deleting it, we're just hiding its visibility. We'll go ahead and close the unit editor and we'll save the changes. And we can see that the changes then propagate to the asset preview. Now we can preview the animation. So all we have to do is click on these animation clips and we get a good idea of what's happening with all of the different animation clips on our model. Now that we've seen that, let's go ahead and bring the door into the scene. So I'll just drag it and drop it in there. And keep in mind that box is still present, it's just invisible at the moment. So I'll go ahead and position the door over by the door opening. Okay, that's great. The next thing we want to do is we want to make sure that the doors will open and close when we walk near them. And we're going to use that box as a physics trigger to control how the animation opens and closes. So let's go ahead and go back into the unit editor and set up a very simple flow to make that happen. So here we have our door, and we have our sub-objects. Here's, again, the door frame, the sliding door, and the physics trigger. We actually need to turn this into a physics actor so that it'll be recognized when we do some of our interactivity. To turn it into a physics actor, it's very simple. Just right-click on it and say Create Physics Actor, and that's all you have to do for that. Now we need to go over to the Properties tab and make some changes so that it can be seen in Flow. We need to go ahead and make sure that the physics node is actually the physics trigger object. We leave it at static, that's fine. Let's scroll down here to the shape commands. Just make sure that this says physics trigger. Make sure this is a box instead of a mesh. We don't have to worry about the material. And the shape template we need to use is a character trigger. So when we're actually navigating through our scene, our character will trip this box and cause the door to play an animation. So now that that's set up, let's pop over to Unit Flow, and we'll create a very simple flow for opening the door. If you recall in the previous Flow movie, we were doing a flow with a lot of nodes and doing some copying and pasting. The good news is that this flow is much smaller. So let's go ahead and add our physics trigger event. So we'll right-click and we'll choose an event, physics trigger, and we'll just set this right there. And we have to set up a couple of things here. We need to make sure that the physics trigger actor is describing the physics trigger object. So we'll go ahead and click on this. And we need to make sure that we type in this name exactly. If there's any errors in this typing, it will not work. So we'll type PHYS_TRIGGER. And that is lining up with the actor name right here. So we'll say OK to that. And now all we need to do is tell it which animations to play. So we'll right-click, Animation, Play Animation Clip. We just need to hook up the Enter command. So when the physics trigger is entered, I want you to play this animation. What animation is it? We'll click up here, and we'll be able to choose from the animations that we've imported. We're only going to do the slide open and close for now, but if you want to try and experiment with the swing open and close, feel free to just change these settings at any time. So we'll choose slide open and say OK. Now there is one other setting that you have to be aware of, and that's this one right here. It should say unit, and then in parentheses it should say me, or the current entity that we're in. We see this because we are in the unit editor. If it doesn't say that, all you have to do is click on it and say my unit. We'll copy and paste this. So we'll do a Control-C and a Control-V. Drag this down. And this animation clip is, of course, going to be our closing animation. So let's go ahead and click this, and we'll do slide closed and say OK. We'll hook it up so that when the character leaves the physics trigger, we play the closing animation. There's one more thing we have to set, and that's the looping value on each animation. We'll go ahead and say false. We don't want this to loop. We only want it to play once. And we're good to go there. So that's it. That's a much simpler flow than we did with the material. We can see that everything should be set up properly. We have our physics trigger. So when our character goes into the physics trigger, it plays the opening clip. And when it exits the physics trigger, it plays the closing clip. So now we just need to do a file save on our unit editor, and it's really important to do that because if you don't save the changes to the unit editor, they won't make it into the scene itself. Okay, so there's one more thing that we have to do. If we were to try to play the level right now, it wouldn't work because we would just fall through the floor. Remember, we're doing a physics trigger, so we actually have to have a ground plane. Even though I have a floor object in here, it's really not good enough for the physics that we're trying to do. So I'm just going to add a very simple plane, and that's going to act as our ground plane. So I'm just going to go to the Create tab and choose a plane, and I'm just going to drop it into the scene. And I just have to make sure that it's big enough for us to walk on it by the door. So I'll set the scale to 20 by 20, and that should be plenty big, but we still want to see the floor of our apartment. So I'm just going to gradually move this right down below the floor, just enough so that we can see the floor of the apartment. Now we're ready to try it and see if it works. Let's go ahead and do File, Save Level, and then let's go ahead and test the level. Now when I go up close to the door, you'll see that it's not opening just yet, and that's because I'm not in true character mode. What I need to do is hit the F2 key, and I'll drop into the scene as a character, and now I'm walking around as a character, and as I walk closer to the door should slide open. And there we go. Door slides open, and we can walk outside, and when we walk farther enough away, it closes. When we walk back into the trigger, it opens up, and we can walk back in the room. And that's it. It's really simple to set up some triggered animation using Flow.